Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's time once again. Let's talk some metal. Tonight, I'm responding to it's technically a contest entry, but to be honest, it was just kind of a neat idea, and so I'm doing it more for that, not trying to win the contest necessarily. But this is on a channel called Stormwind79. I'm not familiar with this channel. I noticed the contest because some other people have entered it. Notably, the video I saw was by Aaron over on the Metal Theologian channel. And yeah, he kind of had the same take where he's like, yeah, this is just a cool set of questions. And so he did a video response. And in listening to his response, I'm like, that is a pretty good set of questions. I think, yeah, sure, I will do the same as well. I'll try to remember to leave a link to both Aaron's entry and to the original Stormwind video in the video description down below, so that if you want to check out those, or if you want to enter the contest yourself, you can do so. But it's a set of 11 questions. Pretty straightforward, but yeah, that's one reason I like it. They're reasonable questions, but nothing convoluted, nothing that's, really, odd or, complicated. Just a good set of solid questions regarding metal bands, metal albums. So without further ado, let's work through them. So question number one, I've got them up here on another screen. So if I'm kind of twisting around or looking up a lot, just making sure I read the questions off correctly because I don't have them memorized. That would be a little bit insane. Let's see. Question number one. A band which everyone else likes, but you can't get into. All right. A good example of this for me is Voivod. Yeah, this is one of those bands tons of people on YouTube and the VC community love to death. A lot of people have it as one of their favorite bands. Albums like Dimension Hatros, a lot of people have it as one of their favorite albums. To be clear, the question says you can't get into the band. It doesn't say you hate the band or you think they're terrible. I don't think those things about Voivod. I just have a real hard time getting into Voivod. I kind of like the first four albums. Up through this album's like, yeah, they're pretty good. I don't mind them. I can play them from time to time. They're okay. But they're not things I put on a pedestal. They're not my favorite band. They're not among my favorite albums. Wouldn't even come close to any of that. It's not stuff I would play very often. For stuff later in the Voivod catalog, I've heard parts of it here and there. And, it's something I come back to from time to time and try to work on. I find some albums that are, yeah, okay. If I remember right, like, is it the albums that came out, like the Newstead era, didn't like that so much. But then the ones that came out right after Newstead was in the band, I was like, okay, this sounds a little better, I think. But that's part of it. I don't even really have a solid grasp on their discography past the first four albums. Different people were coming in and out. And it's kind of like, I just kind of get lost because I'm not interested. They don't click with me strongly enough that I want to know all the details. I know the albums that come right after this one, like Nothing Face, I just cannot get into those albums. To me, it feels like those are some of the albums that move most strongly towards being more prog rock, kind of leaving more of the metal behind, and that seems to be a deal breaker for me. A couple of things I know that give me trouble with Voivod. One, Snake's vocals, especially when he's getting into kind of the more robotic sounding vocals. That is not a style I particularly enjoy from most singers, and I certainly don't enjoy it with his voice. Another thing, all the sort of piggies, playing and stuff is often described as having these very angular or bent chords and riffs. That's something else that usually doesn't appeal to me very much, not just in Voivod, but when other bands are doing that style too. That it's just rough on my ears. One thing I think that helps with Voivod, I think musicians, people that know a little bit of guitar or stuff like that, I think they can appreciate what's going on as being like very spectacular and technical more so. And I'm not a musician, so I don't hear like, oh wow, look how he's doing this weird bent chord progression. I just hear that's kind of dissident. It kind of lacks melody a little bit, and so it's a tough lesson for me. So again, I don't hate the band. I sort of like some of their albums, and I do still kind of test out albums here and there. If it's, just a slow day at the office, it's like, if I'm in the right mood, yeah, let's look up a random Voivod album and see what I think of this one. So I'm still kind of, working on, my Voivodisms, but they're definitely a band that's hard for me to get into that a lot of people seem to really like. And it's absolutely cool that they do. Voivod deserves all the praise they get. I would never, detract from them in any way. They're just not really quite the band for me. All right, let's move on to question number 2. Now that everybody's already unsubscribed from the channel and posted a nasty comment because I'm not a Voivod acolyte. For those who are still watching, question number 2 says, a band you discovered totally randomly or by accident, right? There's lots of examples of this for me. In my younger days, I had to blind buy a lot of things because it was the only way to check stuff out. I got sent a lot of stuff in tape trades that people would just add to a cassette and be like, oh, hey, you might like this. I chose a more recent band just to have, something a little more recent in the field. And the band is Chapel of Disease, which is a really cool name for a band. I can dig that name. This band I first discovered on the eMusic system. eMusic was one of those subscriber MP3 services where you could pick like how much money you wanted to spend a month, and then you were able to download albums up to that limit. So there was like, you could pay $25 a month, and then you could download $25 worth of MP3s a month from their catalog. And they had a pretty decent catalog, pretty big. I have not been subscribed to the site for years now, but I was subscribed for several years. One thing I liked about eMusic was, the MP3s they were not restricted. You could put them on as many devices as you wanted to. And the album prices tended to be really reasonable, in my opinion. A lot of especially stuff in the heavy metal category. A lot of the full albums were like between $3 and maybe $6. Every now and then you'd stumble into something that was a little more expensive. But yeah, so even if you were just doing $10 a month, you could possibly buy 3 albums if you kind of picked carefully in how you were spending it. The only thing I didn't like about eMusic was if you didn't spend the money, you did lose it after, I don't think it was the end of every month, but I think after 60 days or 90 days, those old credits would disappear. And that was one reason I eventually unsubscribed to eMusic. It kind of got to the point where they just weren't adding a ton of stuff I wanted to check out. And so sometimes it felt like, well, I've got to buy something or the credits are going to evaporate. So I don't know, none of these look all that interesting. So I noticed, that was starting to happen more often. And as such, I don't need to be wasting money if they really just don't have much that I want. But anyway, Chapel of Disease was one of those that, just kind of perusing the catalog, it had popped up as, recently added to the heavy metal section. I didn't know anything about it other than A, sounded like a cool name, and B, it had a pretty cool piece of cover art. Liked this. This is their second album. It is called, something slightly convoluted, The Mysterious Ways of Repetitive Art. I was like, well, that's a little head scratcher. That could go in a lot of directions. I'm not sure what this will be, but it's only a couple of dollars. I've got the credits to use anyway. Yeah, let's purchase the Chapel of Disease download and check it out. And I ended up really liking it. They're a death metal band. Their first album is a little more straightforward death metal sounding. On the second album, they're starting to go maybe in a slightly more, there's more of a rock element incorporated. I'd hesitate to call it like death and roll. It doesn't sound like the Helicopters or anything like that. It's even got, some, progressive touches a little bit here and there through the sound, but it all works together really, really well. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit and eventually tracked down, their other albums as well. I've got all 3 on CD at this point. I think it was Brian Arkham that sent me a copy of Mysterious Ways of Repetitive Art on disc. So yeah, it was one of those very random occasions where it's just like, it looks cool. The title sounds interesting. It's got a neat cover. Sure, let's check it out. And it's a band I've enjoyed since. They're overdue to put out another album. I'm hoping they're still active and that a 4th album is in the works. All right, let's move to question number 3. A band or album that you used to dislike, but now like. Okay. Good question, because yeah, it emphasizes that we change our opinions on things over time. One album that I disliked the first time I heard it, actually the first time I owned it, was this one, Queensryche's Rage for Order. Yeah, I knew Queensryche originally from the EP, but then I think I jumped to Mindcrime was the next time I heard Queensryche. I kind of missed the two albums in between. And so yeah, at one point, I was like, yeah, okay, and picked up Mindcrime. It's like, I should get the albums in between because I do enjoy the EP and Mindcrime. Maybe the stuff in between is good. And so, I think I bought both the Warning and Rage for Order pretty close together. I got them used somewhere. And this one just didn't click with me at all. I played it a few times. It's just like, this is not as good as the other stuff. And yeah, I sold it off. I think I actually sold it on eBay. I did, however, keep a cassette copy. I like put the Warning on one side and this on the other. Yeah, and so some point later on, I'm replaying that cassette, and this album very quickly then started to click. It was like, oh no, I already saw that, didn't I? Rats. So yeah, I had to go track down and buy another used copy of it instead. And it's rapidly become, I usually cite it as my favorite Queensryche album. It's tough because they have a lot of good ones in their catalog. The Warning is very underrated. It gets overlooked. The original EP is really good. Operation Mindcrime, of course, is a huge release. But I just really like everything about Rage for Order. They have a really cool, unique sound here. They've really come into their own. They've kind of marked out their own territory in heavy metal at this point. The Warning, they were doing that, but it still does feel like it has a lot in common with other U.S. power metal from the mid '80s. Whereas this is Queensryche, and very few other bands now are going to start trying to move into what Queensryche is doing, rather than Queensryche fitting in with what everybody else was doing. So yeah, excellent album, like it a lot. But yeah, initially my first encounters with Rage for Order, it wasn't that I hated it; it just left me cold. It's just like, nah, I don't think I like this. Sometimes you got to give them more spins, I guess. All right, on to question number 4. A band which you didn't check out for a really long time, but finally did and ended up really liking. Yeah, the band that slipped through the cracks here is this question. That happens to all of us. A big one that happened for me during the 21st century was Panopticon. When Panopticon was sort of up and coming, with their first few albums, I was seeing a little bit of chatter about them on websites and stuff, and people were really gushing about the band, but the descriptions of the music left me kind of puzzled. And about the time stuff like Kentucky was coming out, it was also just happened to be a phase in my life where I wasn't paying as much attention to new releases with metal. I was tied up, with a lot of new stuff at work, a lot of new stuff in my family life. And in terms of music, I was really deep in the rabbit hole of learning more about, old independent US metal singles and a lot of European metal stuff that I had missed, the more underground, obscure things. I was completely in that zone. So I was not present very much on forums that focused on current releases. I was actually kind of actively removing myself from them because a lot of them had just turned into, it was the same people discussing the same albums with the same opinions, and it gotten kind of trollish. And so, yeah, I just wasn't keeping up with new stuff. And so I never bothered to check out Panopticon. And, Panopticon ended up being one of those, COVID quarantine lockdown bands for me, where I finally got around to checking them out. It's just like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm now a good 10 or 15 years behind, and time to start catching up, I guess. So yeah, I didn't avoid them for any particular reason, but none of us can hear everything. And that was a band that, given everything else I was doing at the time and what I was focusing on in metal, yeah, they just didn't get any attention until much later. All right, question number 5. A band which changed its sound or style for the better. Very good question. We often tend to think of lots of metal bands in particular as doing their best work early, and then when they change, it actually gets worse. But that's not always the case. One band I think that didn't hit their stride until a few albums into their career is Thin Lizzy. Uh, the first few Thin Lizzy albums, the first two in particular, while they're not awful, they lack a lot of direction. It still feels like the band is trying to figure out how much folk music they want to have, how much rock music they want to have. Linnet's, getting the vocals worked out. He's writing well, but his vocal delivery, he doesn't quite have all the swagger and machismo just yet. And so yeah, those first two Thin Lizzy albums, I never go back and replay them. I'm not that interested in them. It wasn't really until the third album, Vagabonds, where they started to find that stride. And then they kind of went, from strength to strength. Really, I'd say, the fourth album, though, Fighting, is where they start to latch on to, okay, we are really going to be a hard rock band. And of course, they explode from there and make a series of great albums, that are still considered among the best 70s hard rock by a lot of folks. So yeah, Thin Lizzy, originally they didn't have, those first two albums, there's nothing on them much that sounds like, pure 70s hard rock. Part of that, of course, too, is figuring out the twin guitar change when the lineup changed. And I think I just said Fighting was the fourth album. Fighting's actually fifth, I believe. The first one with the dual guitars is Nightlife. And that's an album that's kind of a little bit subdued sounding. But yeah, once you get to Fighting and then to Jailbreak and then to Johnny the Fox, then yeah, they hit their stride and kind of find their sound and their voice. All right, question number 6. A style of music or band you like, but which people wouldn't expect you to. Another good question. Marty and I have actually discussed doing this as a topic for a heavy metallurgy episode sometime, which maybe we will. One that I hardly ever mention because it's not really metal related at all, but that I do enjoy on occasion. Pause for dramatic effect. Is some EBM music. This can be referred to as, electronic beat music or electronic body music. But yeah, it tends to be, if you're not familiar with it, I don't know if there's a lot of groups that are well known. I can't just throw out a name and be like, oh yeah, this is the type of thing. The stuff that I got into, it's not industrial, to be clear. Industrial's never been my cup of tea. A little bit here and there is okay, but I've never really delved into it a whole lot. It tends to be a little bit more catchy and have a little bit more maybe a pop structure. At first listen, some of the elements going on, again, it's a lot of sampling, a lot of synthesizers, a lot of kind of robot vocal distortion stuff sometimes. But yeah, the songs are meant to be a little bit more melodic, I guess, is one way to describe it. And this is something I got into about, it would have been in the very early 2000s, might have been around 2000, 2001. Just one of the girls I was going to grad school with at the time was into some of this kind of stuff. She was also into metal. So, our music interests overlapped enough that we could, play different stuff for each other. And yeah, she's like, you might like some of this type of stuff. And then checking it, I was like, yeah, that's actually pretty good. The album I selected to show off for this is one by Apoptygma Berserk. It's a name that makes no sense whatsoever. Apoptygma is like, I think it's technically defined as like the different folds and creases in the skirts that are particularly associated with Trojan or Greek warriors. So yeah, I whatever. But this is an album called The Apocalyptic Manifesto. It's kind of a collection album. It's more of an anthology because it's got a couple of remixes and stuff like that on it. This is the kind of music that lends itself to, having, the different mixes, sped up, slowed down, the dance mix, they'll have all kinds of crazy names for them. But still, a lot of really good stuff on here. This one I've always liked because it has a relatively dark tone to a lot of the music. It leans maybe just a little bit towards like, the ogre and skinny puppy type of sound. Again, industrial's not my forte, so I may be really, really off with this comparison. But yeah, this guy just has a little bit more of those, kind of creepy vocals, and some of the, songs definitely have a little more sinister connotation to them than is typical for some of the other bands. Other ones that, I like in this style are VNV Nation, stands for Victory, Not Vengeance. Also, Assemblage 23, better known as A23 for short. I think that's Tom Shear's band. A lot of his early albums I thought were really, really good in this style. I actually saw VNV Nation, went to a concert in Charlotte ages ago. Saw them and another band. They were called And One. They were pretty popular in this style. Their singer always wore like, these very loud, kind of big, suits with the shoulder pad. He had like I think it was like a, almost like, very gumdrop purple suit with like a bright green tie, with the hair slicked back and all. But, very charismatic on stage. It was a really fun show. Enjoyed it a lot. This isn't a style I listen to very often, and in fact, it's been several years since I dug these out. It's also a style I tend to have most of the stuff on MP3s rather than CDs. I had a few CDs by a couple of bands. Most of them, I traded away over time. I still kept a few of them, like the A-pop, but yeah, most of this is the kind of stuff I'm happy to have, just on MP3s. So yeah, it hardly ever comes up in metal related channels, but I do like some of that stuff. And again, the emphasis being on that it's got to have a little bit more, of a pop sensibility. Depeche Mode might be, now that I think about it, the closest thing. I don't know if Depeche Mode really gets called EBM or put in the same category, but Depeche Mode would give you a good idea of what I'm talking about. Stuff that, yes, it's very electronic, but there's actual song structures there. It's not just going for it's not emphasizing the real, mechanical sounding side of industrial music. I think that's where industrial tends to lose me. All right. So I've mentioned Apoptygma Berserk. It's a hard one to even say. Apoptygma Berserk. Probably won't be bringing that one up again anytime soon. I should play it. It's been a long time, though. But let's move on to question 7. 7 is an album which lets down a band's discography, which is not Turbo or Saint Anger. Saint Anger is always kind of the poster child for this type of question, isn't it? So the one I chose is something I don't own. Most people don't own, or if they did, they got rid of it long ago. But for me, a great example of this would be Morbid Angel's Illud Divinium, the I album. Let's just face it, that album's pretty embarrassing, especially for a band of Morbid Angel's caliber. Morbid Angel's got a pretty good catalog almost all the way through. There are certainly albums that are better than others, some that I like more than other albums. But this album really stands out as just it really is one of those, what in the world were they thinking kind of moments. And of course, it was made all the worse because this was supposed to be David Vincent's comeback album with the band. So the hype was even bigger than it would normally be for a Morbid Angel album. And then they delivered this just real mess of a record. Real shame. Even, stuff after this. You got, Kingdom, is it Kingdom Gone? I always want to say Kingdom Come, of course, but I don't think that's right. The K album is kind of interesting. They go back, to a more death metal related sound, but are making it very sludgy and deeper this time. But yeah, Illud has to go down as one of the great missteps in heavy metal history. The album is allegedly still on sale today, direct from the label for like $4. They can't give them away, and with good reason. All right, let's see. We're on to question 8. Now, here the questions move away from album-related topics, and there's a few festival-related topics. I live in the southern United States. We don't get much in the way of festivals around here. The only festival we have that makes any news was that Blue Ridge and Rock Festival that completely imploded back in September. So some of these questions I'm going to have to answer from a more theoretical perspective. The first one says, a festival which you haven't been to but would really like to attend. Well, okay, I can still answer that. I would probably pick the Keep It True Festival. That one has, a pretty consistently really good lineup, top to bottom. Um, I've never heard any kind of like negative reports about it in terms of bands not showing up or having serious issues. So yeah, I think for just my interests, the kind of bands I like, Keep It True would probably be a very cool one to get to check out someday. Obviously, any of those big European festivals are probably going to be neat ones. That one just is one that, when I glance over what bands are appearing out of curiosity, it's always like, yeah, they've got a really, really good lineup. Something like Wacken is so big that there's going to be bands you like, of course, but there's also going to be a lot of bands that you either don't care for or that you've just never even heard of or checked out. All right, on to question number 9 here. 9 is a festival that doesn't appeal to you. The one that immediately jumped to mind when I read this question was Ozfest. Now, Ozfest to me, the lineup was never particularly interesting. Again, sure, you could see certain acts each year that would have been cool to check out, but this always seemed to be a roster that was very dominated by kind of late '90s and early 2000s kind of American bands that appealed to more of a mainstream heavy audience, especially in the U.S. This is a kind of festival I associate with bands like Coal Chamber or System of a Down or Slipknot, for example. And those are just not the bands for me. I'm not interested in those bands. I'm not interested in the style of music they play. Uh, Other folks, of course, they've been very popular. They've done great. Kudos. I'm glad they did. I have nothing against them personally, but it's not for me. It is not whatsoever for me. And if none of those particular bands are on Ozfest, I'm just trying to use them as examples. You can nitpick if you want and be like, well, technically, Coal Chamber never appeared on Ozfest. I don't care. It's the kind of band, that dominated the roster on those shows. I would never have paid money to go to one of those, not even just to see the headliners. Like, no, too expensive. At that point, if you're only going to see like, one, maybe two bands, you're forking out a lot of money and spending a lot of time just to see one thing. That's not really the point of a festival. I'll just wait till they go on tour and see them by themselves, and then I don't have to deal with, thousands and thousands and thousands of other people and a bunch of bands I couldn't care less about. So yeah, Ozfest never had any interest for me. All right, on to question 10. A festival you could keep attending every year. Okay, again, there's technically not many festivals I could attend, period, much less every year. But the one that would come closest to working would be Prog Power in Atlanta. Prog Power has been going for over 20 years. I have been once or twice. I'd have to stop and think about it. But first, it is a well-run show and everything. They stay on schedule very well. They have good venues. It's, a large crowd, but not insanely large. It also tends to be, a pretty overall friendly, cool crowd. It's not, just one giant drunken mess, or you don't have, Nazi, neo-Nazi skinheads, staggering through the crowd looking to start fights or anything like that. It's a pretty chill crowd overall. They bring in some really good bands, especially some European bands that don't get a chance to play in the United States much, if ever. And yeah, it focuses on a lot of power metal and the progressive metal subgenre type. And I do enjoy a lot of that stuff. I haven't listened to as much of it in recent years. I haven't kept up with it as well as I should have. But yeah, any given year, there's going to be several things on the bill. Say, okay, that's a cool band. That's a cool band. Oh, they brought them over. Awesome. That's neat too. So yeah, Prog Power was one I could attend every year. Now, that said, I don't. As I mentioned, I've only been to it once or twice. Reasons that I don't attend Prog Power every year. I just reeled off a lot of good things, and there are some issues. Prog Power, especially in the past 5 years or so, has had a real issue with bands canceling. And this plays out the same way every year. Glenn, the fellow who sets it all up, he announces next year's lineup at this year's show. So it's usually like late August or September timeframe. So whatever weekend they have, this Prog Power 2023, during that weekend, they'll preview what bands are going to be at Prog Power 2024. So it's a full year in advance. And it's one of those things that when tickets go on sale, it's all the FOMO. Everybody's just sitting there, addling the keyboard, got to get the ticket. So they sell out extremely fast. And then over the ensuing months, a bunch of the bands end up dropping out. Now, to be very clear, this is not intentional. This is not like, the Jack Koshnick days where he would, claim a band was coming and he didn't even have any paperwork drawn up with them yet. And then be like, oh, well, technically we never had them on. No, you told us this band was coming, but you didn't have any clue if they'd come or not. It is not that case with Prog Power. Bringing bands over from Europe is expensive. Bringing bands over from Europe means a lot of visa paperwork that has to be done. I mean, and you're advertising it a year ahead of time. Some of these bands disintegrate and fall apart and disband before the next year's Prog Power comes up. So inevitably, the lineup is going to change. And that means, some of the bands you were really excited and wanted to see may not be on the bill at all by the time you go there. Glenn does a good job of scrambling to get, somebody else decent onto the bill. But, if you're really excited to see this band come play, and all of a sudden they replace it with some other random band you don't know or don't care about, that's a real feel bad. So that's one issue Prog Power has had. Second issue is simply expense. The tickets, they're not outrageous, but they're not cheap. It's going to be, I don't know what they are currently. I know when my wife and I went, it was at least, a couple $100 per ticket. So let's say the two of us wanted to go this year. We're probably looking at a minimum $500 for a pair of tickets. Then you're looking at, several $100s for a hotel room for a couple of nights. Then you got to transport yourself there. For us, that's maybe a couple of tanks of gas. So it's not the biggest expense, but it's something. Gas is not cheap these days. You're going to easily burn through $100 or more in food for the weekend. And if you go anywhere near the merch tables, you're easily going to burn through, $100 or so at the merch tables. You put it all together and you're pretty rapidly at $1,000 for the weekend event. It's not cheap. Also, family, kid, babysitter, so that's arrangement's got to be worked out. And that's tough. If you're going for those first couple of, there's usually like, a couple of nights where a couple of bands play on, I want to say it's like Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday is the big stuff. If you want to be there for those first couple of nights, you're looking at needing to take multiple days off of work. It can be an issue. And then kind of the last issue with Prog Power is, well, it's not a gigantic festival. Almost, unless I'm completely off in my memory, it's, a one-stage festival. So there's only so many bands that are going to play each day. And the way the roster usually breaks out for me is that it's like there's usually one or two bands like, yeah, that's cool, I'd like to see them. And then everybody else on the roster is either like, I don't really care for them, or I have never heard of this band in my life. You can go check out those bands on YouTube. You might discover one or two that you like a lot. A lot of them for me end up being like, well, they're okay. They're average. So then you're back to the point where it's like, all right, if the wife and I are going to go to this, we're going to drop over $1,000 to hear two bands that we're really interested in. And we have to buy the tickets almost a year in advance, because if we don't, they'll be sold out. And then we got to sit here for like 10 and a half months crossing our fingers that those two particular bands don't disappear off the roster. That's a tough sell. Some people are fine doing that kind of thing. Frankly, I'm not fine doing that kind of thing. Money is always, an issue. Money is always tight. We watch our money pretty carefully. That's one of those gambits we're just not willing to make most years. And sure, you could, just later on decide, all right, I'll the bands we wanted to see canceled, we'll just back out and avoid a lot of the expense. You still paid several $100s for the ticket. Again, the pair of tickets were probably at least $500. Can you resell them? Can you find somebody who's willing to take them off your hands? Maybe, maybe not. Because other people are also going to be disappointed by the changes on the lineup. So yeah, Prog Power is one we could go to every year, but we just don't. There's just enough issues that come up with it that, it isn't. The years we've gone have been years where there were so many bands on the bill that we were really interested in that we felt like, okay, it's okay if one or two of these don't show up because there's still like 4 or 5 others that we want to see. But that's unusual. All right, let's wrap this up. Last question. Your favorite alcoholic drink? Okay, this one feels a little tacked on, but for me, straightforward, I am a beer person. I don't mind, some hard liquor stuff here and there, but I've never gone down that rabbit hole. I never wanted to be somebody who could sit there and sniff a glass like, oh, this is a 32 port. I can detect the hint of nutmeg. If that's your thing, that's absolutely fine. It's a pretty expensive hobby to get into. And again, it wasn't something I ever wanted to spend a ton of money sampling every different type of scotch on the planet. And B, you also have to, spend a lot of time drinking and possibly getting drunk. I've been there, I've done that, but yeah, I've never been a heavy drinker at all. I'm quite okay with beer. Amok beer, if I need to be a little more specific than beer, okay. More of ale, lager, Oktoberfest stuff in there. I don't mind something like Guinness when I'm in the mood for it. Not really an IPA fan. There's a few exceptions. McEwen's had a really good IPA. Most IPAs, though, I just feel like they're a little bitter. They don't quite go down quite right. So yeah, I will tend to gravitate towards the beers that are a little, lighter, maybe something like that. I don't drink any of the really cheap, commercially available beer. Anything like if it's made by Bud or Coors or any Michelob, any of that kind of stuff. No, sorry, that's water. I'm not going to waste my time on that. So I can be a little snobby about that kind of piss water beer. If I have to drink a piss water beer, PBR, okay, we'll drink some of that one. Rolling Rock, I can demean myself to drink Rolling Rock as well at times. I don't mind that one, but for the most part, I'm going to get a beer that's a little bit better. But again, I'm also not going to delve into every single micro brew and be trying to tease apart all the accent notes or anything. So I just want a beer that's relatively easy to drink, tastes good, and I'm pretty happy with it. And that's I'll have one, maybe 2 a week. Not a heavy beer drinker. All right, so that is the end of the questions. That means it's the end of the video. And that means it's time to talk metal in the comments down below. Go check out the video that Aaron posted and check out the original video on Stormwind 79. Make a video response yourself if you'd like to. Maybe you can win the contest. But what do you think about these? Any particular questions stand out to you that you're like, oh, I've got a great answer to that particular question? Oh, there's a festival I do try to go to every year. Or, yeah, there's this band that doesn't resonate for me either. Hey, leave a comment in the comment section down below and let folks know what you think of some of these questions. All right, until next time, everybody, take care of yourself. And as always, keep banging your head.